Well, North Carolinians are making their voices heard in this year's election. Already over 3 million votes have been cast, nearly 40% of registered voters. Tonight, we're joined by Tim Suji, the Forsyth County Board of Elections Director, and we're talking about what you need to know during this election season. We've only got a few days left, and also what the process is after Election Day. You can get your question answered by an expert today. That's 336-379-5775. This is key, folks. You can ask your neighbor and all that other kind of stuff, but the person who you really need to ask is the man that is sitting behind the Zoom camera right now. All right, so let's talk about this, Tim. Oh, goodness. What is that? Oh, that is the Polo Park Community Center. We're taking a look at something else. Oh, I'm sorry. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty here. Hey, Tim, so let's talk about this. Yesterday was the last day for folks to be able to request an absentee ballot. What would you suggest them do if they didn't request it or they are just requesting it this past week?
Right. So at this point, we're strongly encouraging absentee voters or voters that missed that deadline to take advantage of the last remaining days of early voting or to vote at their voting precinct on election day. We do offer curbside voting. So for those voters that are physically unable to enter the polling place, you can have someone drive you out to any one of our early voting sites or their election day polling place, and we will provide curbside voting to you so that you don't even have to get out of your car. You just park in one of those curbside voting spots, and our poll workers will come out there and service you.
Okay, so there's other ways if you're feeling like you can't really get to the polls physically. Now, if you have an absentee ballot, you've filled it out, and you're like, oh, but I haven't mailed it yet, what can you do to make sure that your vote gets counted?
Yeah, so at this point, it's really close to the deadline for when absentee ballots have to be received by your Board of Elections office. So, you know, if you can possibly send it in next day mail or through express mail, so that you can ensure that your absentee ballot gets to us in a timely fashion, because the deadline has changed to where absentee ballots must be received by 7:30 p.m. physically by the Board of Elections. It has to be received in the Board of Elections office hands at 7:30 p.m. on election day in order for your absentee ballot to count.
All right, let me ask you this. You can take your absentee ballot to an early voting precinct and hand it in.
Yes, yes. So thank you for bringing that up. We do allow for absentee voters to be able to physically bring in their absentee ballot to any one of our early voting sites, and they'll accept those. And you're also more than welcome to bring it in to the Board of Elections office. Again, that deadline is 7:30 p.m. on election day. Now, one thing I do advise is not to bring it to any one of the election day polling places, because they cannot accept any absentee ballots on election day, or otherwise it'll end up getting disapproved.
Okay, what about if it is a family member or your caregiver who's bringing the absentee ballot to early voting? Is that okay?
That is okay. So we will accept absentee ballots from a near relative, a legal guardian, on your behalf. Now, if you have a disability, you can have a friend or neighbor bring it in on your behalf as well. And so we'll have you sign a log and document that you were doing this on your neighbor or friend's behalf because of a disability.
Gotcha. Okay, so early voting, we want to make sure folks know this. It is going on for the next couple of days.
That's correct. The last day of early voting is this Saturday. Polls will be open until 3 p.m. on Saturday. If we have voters in line at 3 o'clock, we will still allow you to cast your ballot. Just make sure you're in line at that time.
Okay, and then for people who want to participate in early voting, they can see just how busy a polling place is in Forsyth and in Guilford counties.
Yes, so both counties offer wait time trackers on our websites. It's a convenient tool and allows you to see what the wait times are at all of our locations. And so if you don't want to wait in a long line at a particular site, just check out that tracker, and you can find some of the lesser busy sites to go to.
Okay, and another big point when it comes to early voting. let's say you haven't registered yet and you still want to vote in this election. That early voting is the only way you can do it.
That's right. Yep. So the voter registration deadline was a couple of weeks ago, and so at this point, if you haven't been registered to vote, you can only do that during the early voting process. It's what's called same-day registration. And again, it's only offered during early voting. And if you're wanting to take advantage of same-day registration, you will need to present some form of ID or a legal document with your name and current address. So that's for proof of identity as well as proof of residency. And so that will be required when you do same-day registration. It is not offered, this service is not offered on election day. And so if you're wanting to vote and you missed that registration deadline, you'll need to come do it during early voting.
Okay. I know I went to go early vote today, and I noticed that there were signs that said, we are going to ask you your name and your address and your party affiliation. And that is so that people don't get caught off guard because they're saying it with other people in the room.
Right. So it's just your name and address. So if it was a primary election, we would have you state your party affiliation. But for this election, you will be asked to state your name and address, as well as present an acceptable form of ID, photo ID. That could include either your driver's license, or if you have a U.S. passport, we'll accept a military ID or a veteran's ID. There are several university IDs that are acceptable as well, as long as they were approved by the State Board of Elections, as well as local government employee IDs that have been approved by the State Board. And then there's a whole slew of tribal enrollment cards that can be accepted for purposes of voting. And then lastly, you could also present one of the free voter IDs that all of the county boards of elections offer to voters. So if what you ought to do is if you don't have one of those acceptable IDs, you can come by to the Board of Elections office. We'll verify your voter registration, take your picture, and give you one of those free IDs. This service is only offered up until the last day of early voting. So there is a cutoff for that. We'll resume in making free IDs the day after Election Day. So if you're needing to get one of those IDs, come on by and we'll produce one for you.
Okay. All right. So what we're doing is we're taking your questions when we come back. 336-379-5775. Get your question answered next.